Back in 2017, I moved to a small rural town in Illinois. I only knew one person there, and as an introvert in my early 20s, making friends was difficult, especially in a town where most of the population was retired. My friend, who I'll call Clara, introduced me to an older couple in their early 50s who were looking for a dog sitter. She thought it would be a good way for me to earn some money and make connections. We met at their house so I could see the place and meet the dogs. The home was a 1970s brick ranch, severely outdated and slightly falling apart in places. I explored abandoned houses for fun, so that didn't bother me. The dogs were sweet, but the couple themselves felt off. They were polite, yet instead of making eye contact, they seemed to scan my entire body while I spoke, like they were sizing me up. During the tour, they barely spoke. They would open doors, let me look inside, then quietly close them again. They also mentioned they sold firearms from their home as a side business. That alone didn't bother me, but what did was the number of cameras. There were cameras outside, in the hallways, living room, kitchen, office, garage, backyard, driveway, everywhere. They told me it was for insurance purposes. It made me uncomfortable, but I really wanted the money and some sense of connection in this town. A week later, they left, and I began dog sitting. I worked from home, so I set up my workspace in their office. A monitor displayed the outdoor camera feeds, which oddly made me feel safer, considering the house sat on a large property surrounded by woods. The dogs had a doggy door and could go outside freely. The first night passed without issue. The second night, I noticed the driveway camera had gone offline. Rural internet can be unreliable, so I didn't think much of it. Still, I went to check, just in case. As I walked toward the back door, the dog suddenly sprang up and bolted outside, barking frantically. It was around 10 p.m., and my nerves instantly kicked in. I followed them and saw both dogs barking at the same spot along the fence that backed into the woods. I couldn't see anything, but horror movies had already done their damage to my imagination. I used treats to get them back inside, then blocked the doggy door with a heavy chair and went to bed. The next morning, I woke up late and noticed the house was silent. The dogs weren't at the foot of the bed. I called their names, no response. When I looked outside, they were already in the yard. That's when my stomach dropped. I turned and saw the chair I'd pushed in front of the doggy door, sitting across the room. There was no way the dogs had moved it. Panicking, I called Clara and begged her to come over. She arrived about 20 minutes later, and we searched the entire house together. Nothing. No signs of anyone else. She tried to reassure me that maybe I hadn't placed the chair as firmly as I thought. I wanted to believe her, so I pushed through the next few days on high alert. On the fourth night, after dinner, I sat down in the office and glanced at the monitor. All the cameras were offline, every single one. My stomach dropped. One camera failing was believable. All of them wasn't. I texted the couple to let them know. Hours passed with no reply. It was close to midnight when I finally lay down, leaving the TV on to break the silence. Then the dog scrambled to the door again. Heart racing. I grabbed the knife beside my bed and looked outside. Nothing. The dog stopped barking and just sniffed along the fence. That's when I heard a loud thump from the opposite side of the house. I got the dogs back inside, blocked the door again, and took a photo this time, proof for myself. I followed the noise to a back room and froze. There was a feeling in the air. Not a sound, just a presence. I called out, no response. I quietly backed out, locked the door, and sat in the living room with the dogs, my phone in one hand and the knife in the other. About 20 minutes later, I received a text from the wife. "Don't worry about the cameras. You're safe." That sentence made my blood run cold. I hadn't mentioned safety. Then another text came in, asking me to check if the garage door inside that back room was open. I didn't respond. 2 minutes later, she texted again, pressing me to check. As I approached the door, I heard movement. Then my phone lit up. "I see you're up. Please go check." I realized then they were watching me. I opened the door slowly. The garage door was open, and it was pitch black inside. As my phone lit up again, the glow revealed the outline of an arm pressed against the wall near the door. I ran. I locked the door, grabbed my keys, and bolted out the front. As my headlights hit the garage, I saw a man crouched behind a box. I drove straight to the police station. When officers checked the house, they found nothing. No break-in. No one there. Minutes after they left, I received one last text from the wife. "Plans changed. We'll be home soon. You can go now." As I drove away, I saw a car pull into their driveway. No headlights. I texted her, "Someone just pulled into your driveway." Her reply came instantly, "I know." I never heard from them again. Story 2, the couple at the bar. I work as a bartender in a busy bar outside Baltimore. It's fast-paced, loud, and packed most nights. One evening during a rush, I noticed an elderly couple sitting silently in a corner booth. They hadn't ordered anything. They weren't talking. They were just staring at the wall. When I approached them, the man slowly turned toward me. His face was pale, his eyes sunken. He shook his head once and said nothing. Later I looked back, and they were staring directly at me. When I checked again, they were gone. My co-worker swore she never saw them. As I left that night, I saw 2 figures standing under a street light across the road. I never saw them again. My friend's dad worked as a tree saw operator. Because logging crews were often spread across huge areas, they relied heavily on radios to stay in contact, especially when working on opposite ends of the same site. Several years ago, my friend's dad and his co-worker, Griffin, were assigned to a job high up on a remote mountain. It took the company more than 3 weeks just to carve out a road wide enough for trucks and equipment to reach the site. By the time work finally began, they were deep in one of the most isolated areas imaginable. About 10 days into the job, things started to feel wrong. It began with strange chatter over their radios. At first, it was faint, static-filled murmurs that didn't form real words. They switched to channels, assuming it was interference. But no matter what frequency they changed to, the voices followed. Anyone who's ever used a standard radio knows how unsettling that is. It shouldn't be possible. As they moved farther up the mountain, the voices became clearer. Still not full conversations, but fragments. The tone felt casual, almost normal. Yet something about it felt deeply off. Around the same time, they began finding signs that someone else had been there before them. Empty containers, footprints, small, makeshift camps tucked just out of sight. This made no sense. The area was practically inaccessible. No one should have been up there. One afternoon, Griffin discovered a hidden tent just off a narrow trail and called my friend's dad over. Inside, they found belongings that immediately told them whoever had been there was dangerous. Griffin wanted to leave immediately. My friend's dad, stubborn, and focused on the job, insisted they finish the work. They compromised by limiting radio use to emergencies only. That night, neither of them slept. The radio crackled to life again. This time, they could clearly hear two men talking. The conversation itself was ordinary, discussing supplies and firewood, but knowing these voices might belong to whoever had left that tent filled the camper with dread. The next night, my friend's dad snapped. When the voices came back, he grabbed the radio and demanded to know who they were and what they were doing on the mountain. The response was instant. Silence. That silence was worse than the voices. Later that night, Griffin woke my friend's dad and whispered that someone was outside the camper. They heard footsteps on gravel. Then the door handle moved. Slowly, deliberately, they sat frozen, unable to move, as scratching sounds dragged across the door. Minutes passed. When my friend's dad finally moved toward the door, everything happened at once. The door burst open and chaos followed. The men escaped into the forest, disappearing as quickly as they had appeared. My friend's dad was seriously injured. They drove for hours to reach help. The incident was reported, but nothing ever came of it. Weeks later, another worker from the crew was found dead nearby under horrifying circumstances. No arrests were ever made. To this day, my friend's dad lives with the trauma of that night, and ever since hearing this story, I've never felt comfortable in deep woods again. Story, the SOS from across the lake. Last summer, when I was 20, my friend James invited me to his family's lake house. His family was incredibly wealthy, the kind of rich where they owned properties all over the country. The lake was secluded, lined with massive vacation homes that sat empty most of the year. That night, it was just the two of us sitting on the dock with a few beers, trying to relax. That's when I noticed a flashing light across the lake. At first, I thought it was a reflection, but it kept flashing. 3 short bursts, 3 long, then 3 short again. James went pale. "That's SOS, he said. I didn't believe him until I checked. He was right. The light stopped suddenly, leaving the lake completely dark. Against our better judgment, we decided to investigate. We took a kayak across the water toward the house where the signal came from. As we got closer, we noticed the place looked abandoned. The dock was collapsed. The yard was overgrown. Inside, the house was completely empty. No furniture, no signs of anyone living there. On the second floor, we found the source of the light, a projector aimed directly at the window. It wasn't a distress signal, it was bait. Before we could react, we heard movement behind us. We ran. By the time we reached the yard, the kayak was gone. Someone had been waiting. We jumped into the freezing lake and swam for our lives, making it back purely on adrenaline. When police investigated, they found nothing. No evidence, no footprints, no answers. To this day, I don't know who set that trap or what would have happened if we'd stayed even a second longer. Story, the house next door. When I moved into my new home, I was desperate for a fresh start. The neighborhood was quiet, safe, and filled with families, except for the house next door. It was enormous and completely silent. The man who lived there, Damon, was around my age. Friendly enough, but distant. He never had visitors, never left the house. His car never moved. Then one night, I woke up to loud music. Cars filled his driveway. I went over to ask him to turn it down. The door was unlocked. Inside, the house was empty. The party was a recording, and something much worse was happening downstairs. I barely made it back home before realizing I had been seen. Minutes later, men poured out of the house, searching the street. Damon was not among them. I never confronted him. I never went back over. And I moved shortly after. Some doors are better left closed. Eventually, they all went back inside, and the music stopped soon after. I stood by my window, trying to make sense of what I had just witnessed. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? The music wasn't playing anymore, and there was no clear crime to report. What bothered me most was that none of my other neighbors seemed affected by the noise. Most of them had children. If they really hadn't heard anything and I called the cops, Damon would know it was me. Then there were the shoes. The people I had seen were all wearing boots. Heavy boots. So why were there extra shoes left in the foyer? Did they bring them just to leave them there? I had too many questions and no answers. Eventually, I went to bed. The next morning, I looked out my bedroom window. Every single car was gone, including Damon's. I tried to work that day, but I couldn't focus. Every few seconds, my eyes drifted back to his house. After a few hours of his car still being gone, I decided to go for a walk, partly to clear my head, mostly to glance through his windows without being obvious. There was nothing. Days passed. Damon didn't return. Neither did his car. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I also couldn't understand how none of my neighbors had heard the noise that night, so I finally asked them. I went door to door, casually bringing up the party and asking if they'd heard it. No one knew what I was talking about. Even after I told them which house it came from and how late it was, they all looked at me like I was confused. That's when I started wondering if I was losing my mind. That was months ago. Damon still hasn't returned. No one is maintaining the house. The grass is overgrown, and packages are piled against his front door untouched. I don't know what to think. Maybe it was nothing, but no one stages a fake party like that unless they're hiding something. And if it was something illegal, how could they forget to lock the front door? Maybe that's what those men were arguing about. I honestly don't know anymore. And the fact that none of my neighbors seemed bothered makes me feel like I'm part of something much bigger than I understand. I know I'm probably just being paranoid, but there are too many unanswered questions. If Damon ever comes back, I don't know whether I should confront him or pretend I never noticed anything at all. Story 2, The Whistling, rewrite. My name is Evan. I'm 28 years old. After my divorce, I moved to a small town called Chatham, Alabama. I didn't have many options, so I moved into my grandfather's old house. He passed away a few years ago and left it to the family. The house sits about 10 minutes outside town on 10 acres, surrounded by woods. It's quiet out there, too quiet. The house itself is old. The floors creak, the doors stick, and no matter how high the thermostat is, it always feels cold. The first few nights were normal. I unpacked, cleaned, and spent evenings on the porch with a beer. No traffic, just wind through the trees and the sound of owls. Then the noises started. The first time I heard it was on the 7th night, just after midnight. I was almost asleep when I heard whistling outside. It wasn't a song I recognized, just a slow, broken tune, completely off-key. I assumed it was a hunter or a drunk neighbor. The next night, it happened again. Same tune, same time, but closer. I turned on the porch light and went outside with a flashlight. Nothing. No tracks, no movement, just the whistling fading into the woods. For the next few nights, it kept happening around 1:15 a.m., like clockwork. That's when I started to feel like someone was doing it on purpose. I called the sheriff's office. An older deputy, who I'll call Deputy H, came out. When I told him what was happening, he went quiet. He told me my grandfather had reported the same thing for years. That shook me. Deputy H warned me to lock my doors and stay inside at night. The whistling kept getting closer. One night, it came from behind the shed. Another night, from the front porch. 3 long whistles, then silence. The night after that, it came from under the floorboards. I didn't sleep. I searched the attic and found my grandfather's journals. He wrote about the whistling happening every spring for over a decade, always when he lived alone. The next night, I stayed awake with a shotgun I barely knew how to use. At exactly 1:17 a.m., the whistling started again. This time, it was inside the house, from the hallway. I turned on the light. Nothing was there. 2 nights later, I heard knocking, slow, deliberate knocks from the back door, then footsteps, then darkness. I saw someone standing in the hallway, watching me. They ran. I fled that house that night. The locks were changed the next day. I never went back. Story 3, the 3 a.m. banging rewrite. I live alone in a small 1-story house, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, quiet life. Because of my work, I keep strange hours. I'm most productive late at night. One night, past 3 a.m., I was working in complete silence when suddenly, footsteps running down the hallway. Then violent banging on my bedroom door. I froze. I expected the door to burst open. It never did. After a long moment, I heard footsteps retreating. I searched the house. No one was there. Every door and window was locked. The police found nothing. To this day, I still don't understand how someone got in or why. Story 4, the foreclosed house. Rewrite start. I work for a property preservation company. We secure foreclosed homes, clean them out, winterize them, and sometimes board them up. In 2020, I was assigned a house in rural upstate New York. It was isolated, surrounded by woods, no nearby homes. The owner had passed away. No heirs. The utilities had been shut off for over a year. I arrived around 9 a.m., and that's when I realized I wasn't as alone as I thought. From the outside, the house looked intact. The windows were closed, the roof looked fine, and the front door was locked. The only sign of neglect was the weeds and thick vines crawling up the porch. I had to shove the front door open because the wood had swollen in the frame. Inside, everything seemed normal. Dusty furniture, stale air. The kind of place that had been untouched for a long time, but not destroyed. Then my work phone rang. It startled me because I had already checked my signal. There was none. 0 bars. Still the phone buzzed in my hand. The caller ID read, "Unknown caller." I answered. Nothing. Just a low crackling sound, like static. I said hello twice, then hung up and chalked it up to a glitch. I got to work. I always start by photographing every room and every item. The living room was cluttered with heavy furniture, lace curtains, framed paintings, porcelain figures. It reminded me of my grandmother's house. The hallway smelled strange. Not decay, just mildew, dust, and something faintly metallic. There were 3 bedrooms. One was nearly empty, except for a sagging mattress on the floor. Another was clearly a sewing room, filled with thread spools and a dusty old machine. On the wall was a corkboard. It was covered in newspaper clippings, obituaries, dozens of them, carefully cut out and pinned, all local. None of the names meant anything to me. In the master bedroom, something caught my eye. A rotary phone sitting on the nightstand, off-white, yellowed with age, with a long coiled cord. The kind of phone that shouldn't work anymore, especially since the landline had been disconnected years ago. I moved on to the bathroom. That's when my phone rang again. Unknown caller. This time, I hesitated. I stepped into the hallway and answered. Silence at first. Then after a few seconds, I heard a whisper. So quiet I almost missed it. Don't answer the phone in the bedroom. The line went dead. I stood there frozen. The house was completely silent. I checked the windows, still closed, no signs of forced entry. I told myself someone was messing with me, but no one else knew I was there, and I still had no signal. I tried calling my supervisor. The call failed. I decided to finish the job as fast as possible. As I boxed up items in the living room, books, figurines, dusty glassware, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My eyes kept drifting toward the hallway. Then I heard it. Not my phone. The rotary phone. It rang from the bedroom. Loud. Mechanical. Echoing through the house. That phone should have been dead. I slowly walked down the hallway. The ringing continued over and over. When I reached the doorway, I saw the receiver trembling slightly with each ring. I wasn't touching it. The ringing stopped on its own. I backed away. I wanted to leave, but I still had one thing left to check, the basement. The door was in the kitchen. I opened it and stepped down, flashlight in hand. The air smelled like mold and rust. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with old paint cans and broken furniture. In the back corner was a small table. On it sat a cordless phone, a newer model, covered in dust. Next to it was a stack of yellowed notebooks. I picked one up and flipped through it. Each page had a name, a date, and a short note. Rang once. Didn't answer. Picked up. Warned him. Dozens of entries. My stomach dropped. I rushed back upstairs and left immediately. I didn't finish the job. I reported the property as unsafe and was reassigned. 2 days later, another worker went out there. He texted me. The phone in the bedroom rang while I was inside. What the hell? He quit the next day. Police found nothing. To this day, I don't know if it was an elaborate prank or something far worse. Scott lived in one of those older wooden houses built along the side of the mountain. Only a few other homes were nearby, all spaced far apart. It was a great area for skiing. If only I knew how. When I pulled into his driveway and he came out to greet me, the first thing I noticed was that something felt off. I hadn't seen him in years, so at first I told myself it was just time and distance. But the way he spoke was different. Slower. He paused between sentences, like he kept losing his train of thought. He helped carry my bag inside. The house was warm, but almost empty. There wasn't much furniture, just a couch, a small table, a couple of chairs, and some antique-looking decorations on the walls. He told me I could sleep on the couch since it folded out into a bed. I didn't mind. Across from the couch was a long, dark hallway leading to a bathroom and 2 empty guest rooms. Scott explained that the house had belonged to his grandparents, who had recently passed away, and that he lived there alone now. The hallway had no light at the end. All the doors were open. From the couch, it looked like a pitch-black tunnel stretching into the back of the house. I couldn't explain why, but it made me uncomfortable. That first night, we talked about old times, but the conversation felt forced. Scott barely made eye contact, and I noticed he kept glancing toward the hallway. I assumed living alone in the mountains for years had just made him socially awkward. When it was time to sleep, he went upstairs to his bedroom. I set up the couch and left a light on near the hallway because the darkness bothered me. I felt silly, but I needed it. Around 2:00 a.m., I woke up to loud thumping above me, fast footsteps, running back and forth across the upstairs floor, stopping suddenly, then sprinting again. It went on for about 20 seconds before cutting off completely. No doors opened, no voices, just silence. I eventually fell back asleep, unsettled but exhausted. The next day was even stranger. Scott barely spoke, barely ate, and whenever I asked if he was okay, he just nodded. I noticed him walking down the hallway multiple times throughout the day. I assumed he was using the bathroom, even though I never heard anything. That night, a snowstorm rolled in. Wind slammed against the house, hard enough to make the walls shake. I actually liked the atmosphere. Being snowed in felt cozy. I went to sleep around midnight. At about 2 a.m., I woke up again. This time, I heard scraping sounds coming from the hallway, something dragging slowly across the wooden floor. Then it stopped. A second later, there was a sharp tap on the wall behind me, like someone flicked it with their finger. I stared down the hallway. The light was off this time. Total darkness. I didn't move. I just rolled over and tried to convince myself it was an old house making noise. The third night was the worst.